is Dan, and one of the most frequent questions that I get as an underwater cinematographer is what camera and housing should I buy? And I thought it would be cool, instead of me just showing you what I use, I would actually get a whole load of other people involved and they can show you and talk about what they use all at the same time. Filming underwater is very specific to your budget, what you're filming, who you're filming for, whether you're doing photos, videos, so there's a lot of variables involved. So I thought to give you a better idea, a better spectrum of what is required, I'd ask all these guys to feature as well. And thank you so much to everyone that appears in this video for giving up your time and sharing your equipment. I fully encourage you as well to get in touch with anyone that you see in this video. They'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. I've deliberately not talked about lighting in this video. Lighting is a whole nother subject. So this is specifically about cameras and about housings, but do feel free to get in touch with anyone that you see in this video to ask any further questions or ask about lighting or anything like that. Okay, so with mine, I am currently using the Panasonic GH5S. Originally I bought the GH5, which is what I'm filming this on. And the reason I bought the GH5 originally and now the GH5S is because the specifications for the camera of this price range and size are really impressive for video. I tend to lean more towards video than I do for photos. So the video capabilities of this camera are really impressive, especially for things like slow motion. I'm a huge sucker for slow motion, and the quality of slow motion on this camera is really, really good. The housing is a dedicated Nauticam housing for GH5 and GH5S, and the reason that I went with Nauticam is there you make really solid housings, and if you're going to take an expensive camera underwater, you want to know that it's quite safe. You can control every element of the camera on the housing, which is really, really important for all the settings, usually everything in manual. So that was really important. Also the size. For the price and the capabilities, this sort of size really suits me well. I do a lot of jumping on and off of boats, a lot of traveling, and so to have the housing, I can take this housing on as carry-on, is really, really important. And yeah, so the overall compatibility of this camera mixed with the housing, it suits me really, really well.
Hi, my name is Roger Munns. I am an underwater cinematographer. I work mostly on natural history productions, such as Blue Planet 2 and 7 Worlds, 1 Planet. I use Red Digital Cinema DSMC2 Helium, which is an 8K camera, and I put it inside this Gates deep weapon housing. It's a big housing, weighs about 15 kilos. It's made out of, machined out of solid blocks of aluminium, incredibly robust, very durable, and extremely reliable, which is one of the reasons that I chose this housing. I fitted it out with a 5-inch monitor. You can also get a 7-inch monitor for better focus and macro work. It's got a 10-inch dome on it, which is really great for wide angle, rectilinear, keeps the corners nice and sharp. And you can also trick this out with pretty much any lens you want using different stackable port extenders, which is nice. You don't have to travel with too many extenders to fit the range of lenses that I use. And you can fit cinema lenses and stills lenses, pretty much anything that you can throw at it with the right gears. You can control everything through the red mode, get into the menus, change all the settings you need. And what I really love about this camera is its size, its mass. It's hard work on a boat, but once you've got it in the water and trimmed correctly with trim weights, then it's beautifully neutral and it has a lot of inertia. So as you move it through the water, it's very smooth, like so. So this really helps get nice smooth shots, which is what you really need in natural history filmmaking.
Alright, I'm George Probst. I'm going to do a quick run through of my underwater gear. I'm typically shooting out at Guadalupe, which means shooting in natural light, so I'm not going to cover strobes here. I'm just going to cover my natural light setup. Starting with camera body. This is a Canon 5D Mark III full frame DSLR. I've got it paired with a 16 to 35 millimeter f4L lens with image stabilization. So got an ultra wide lens on a full frame body. Great for underwater shooting, great for close-ups when the sharks come in close. You can often get the whole shark's body in the frame even when they're in real close. Been shooting with this camera since 2014. done really well for me. I'll continue shooting with it as long as it holds up. Housing wise, this is Nauticam 5DS. It's an aluminum housing, great button placement on it. I can get to just about everything with my gloves on, so I really love the setup. I've been using this housing since about 2016. Out of all the housings I've used, it's my favorite so far. It's positively buoyant, which is a benefit out at Guadalupe. We're typically anchored in 60 meters to 90 meters of water. And if you've got a negatively buoyant housing and for whatever reason you lose it, it's going to sink down to the bottom, which I've seen happen to other people. It's heartbreaking to watch a camera float down to the bottom, both as a photographer and as an ocean conservationist, because that's just debris going into the ocean that we can't get back. With a positively buoyant housing, if you lose it, it's going up to the surface and you can retrieve it most of the time. So that's another benefit of this housing. I got it paired with a 180 millimeter glass dome from Nauticam. I've only been shooting with this since November. It's a little bit smaller profile than domes I've shot with in the past, but at Guadalupe, we're confined to cages, so having a smaller profile on the dome has come in handy, and I'm really digging this dome so far. GoPro Hero 8 Black on the side here. I let that run while I'm shooting, just in case something crazy happens, have it caught on film. So that's basically my setup.
Hello, my name is Alex Mustard and I'm an underwater stills photographer. First of all, cameras. These are the two main camera bodies that I'm using most of the time at the moment. Both full frame Nikon SLRs. This is a Nikon D5, but the camera I'm using mostly actually these days is a Nikon D850. These are my two D850 bodies that I'm shooting with most of the time. Those cameras go inside housings. This is the housing for the Nikon D5. Both my housings made by Subal, which are a small company in Austria that makes specialist handmade housings for SLR cameras. That's the Nikon D5 housing. The D850 housing. You can see very similar. They take the same ports. Both of these at the moment have got 230mm, so 9-inch dome ports on, but I have a whole range of optics that I use on them. Perhaps the coolest accessories I use on those are the large dome ports I use for split level photography. This is my travel big dome port for split level photography, and if you think that one is big, which it is, you should see the one that is the non-travel version. This is the really huge one that only gets to go out in the UK, but it's an absolutely huge dome port for shooting split level photos in rough conditions. Really cool to use though, and the whole housing floats really nicely when it's all weighted up using this. I'm also a really big user of water contact lenses and ports on my system. But one of the ones I use probably the most is this one. This is Nauticam's WACP1 wide angle corrector port. Very good optics, very flexible underwater, really nice to use, not so huge and big for travel. Another big favourite of mine is this lens. This is a Nikonos RS 13mm fisheye. This is another water contact, so designed to work only underwater, so it has superior optics to anything behind a dome. Fisheye lens made by Nikon for the old Nikonos RS camera, which is on my bookshelf somewhere as a bookend. But this lens, you can convert it to work with modern cameras and gives excellent underwater performance. And then the final water contact optic that's worth talking about is this, which is my Carl Zeiss Ivanov corrector port, which is another this was made by Zeiss in the 70s to be used with Hasselblad medium format cameras, and I've adapted it to be able to use it with a modern SLR. I also shoot macro with my camera, and this is my favourite macro port. It's made by Saga. It's super light, brilliant for travel, and lovely and tapered. Comes down to a 67mm filter at the front, so you can screw on wet diopters and that sort of thing underwater. Really great little macro port. So obviously I've used this all the time as well.
I'm Jake Davis. I'm a marine biologist and underwater videographer from Wales, and I shoot with the Sony A6300, which is a great mirrorless camera. Underwater housing I have is the salted line from Sea Frogs, and then I've got it connected up to two big black Molly 5s from Big Blue Lights. To get some of those wider angle shots, I've got the GoPro Hero Black 8. As the A6300 is a really good photography camera too, so I use that to get some stills.
Hi, my name is Caitlin McQueenie. I'm an underwater photographer based in Palm Beach, Florida, and I shoot with the Olympus TG4. It's a compact camera released in 2015 and it has 16 megapixels of resolution. I also have the Olympus PT056 underwater housing, as well as the IDAS fisheye wet lens. So all I have to do before each dive is simply put the camera into the housing. And as its name suggests, the wet lens screws directly onto the outside of the housing. Now I love this camera because as you can see it's very travel size friendly. It can fit in a small backpack and carry-on, which is really good for traveling. Also, because it's a compact camera, it doesn't need interchangeable lenses. So I'm able to switch from shooting a macro subject to a larger animal while underwater. I don't have to come back up to switch lenses, which is excellent. And another good reason why I absolutely love this camera is that the camera itself is actually saltwater proof. So if the housing does flood, normally that would mean your camera is dead. However, because it's saltwater proof, if my housing does flood, my camera's completely fine. It is fantastic, and that's what I shoot with. It's compact, small, affordable, durable, and I love it.
My name is Daan Verhoeven. I'm a freediving cameraman, and the camera I use is a Sony A7R II. The thing I like best about this camera is the sensor. It has incredible dynamic range, lots of details in the shadows, even some details in the highlights. You can go down to 30 or below 30 and I can still bring colors back from the raw files. So I love that. The lens I've been shooting with lately the most is the Sigma 14mm f1.8. It's an art lens, nice and sharp, nice and wide, doesn't distort, doesn't break the bank either, so I quite like that lens. I also have the Sigma 20mm f1.4 and the Sigma 35mm f1.4. I also, of course, have the Sony 1635 lens. It's a lovely standard lens, especially if you're a wildlife and freedive photographer like I am. Like, you want the wideness and then you can zoom in if you need to. A Nauticam housing. I'm really impressed with the Nauticam system. I had Huggy Foot before, which is a solid housing. Like, they're both made out of aluminum, so that it can take a bit of a beating. I also like the haptic feedback. Like, every button kind of gives you a little bit of pushback, and you know, like, you can press the shutter button halfway to focus. That kind of stuff does that well.
My name's Rob Taylor. I'm a camera person. I started mainly doing topside, and then over the last 10 or 15 years I've kind of got wetter and wetter and ended up doing quite a lot of underwater these days, which I love. At the moment I'm using this Nauticam housing for red cameras. It's a really nice tidy housing, not as big as some housings. You get full control of the red on the side panel here, all the focus and zoom and record here. This is the 19cm dome port, so that's quite nice and small. They do a 23cm I think as well for wider lenses. This is the Nauticam housing for the small HD 502 monitor. When it's all set up, it just sits on there, plugs in there, and that's a really great bright monitor with really sharp peaking and zebras and waveforms and things, which is super useful when you can't see much. I've also got this back for the housing, and this has got a glass port here, so you can put the red zone small monitor in there, which means that you can do away with this. And if you're free diving and holding your breath and you want a really kind of small housing, it's basically just that with that small port on, so it's really easy to push through the water. Also, my older housing, which I still use a lot, is this Aquatica housing, which was originally for a Canon 5D Mark III, and then they did an upgrade kit to make it take the Canon 5D Mark IV. So this is nearly 10 years old, I think, maybe over 10 years old, and it's still a current housing for a current camera. Even though the 5D Mark IV isn't as good as some of the modern cameras for video, for stills it's an amazing camera. I also kind of like messing around in waves and things because I've got a background in whitewater kayaking and stuff, so I usually use this because it's a bit easier to hold on to and a bit less risky than taking the big housing. So this is my big kind of video setup, and this is my kind of smaller stills and freediving setup, and it all works out really well.
Hi folks, my name's Jason Boswell and I'm an underwater camera operator and technical diver based here in Cape Town, South Africa. And Dan has asked me to chat to you this morning a little bit about my underwater setup. So starting with the camera, I use a Panasonic GH5S. And the reason I got this is because when it came out, it was the first mirrorless camera to do 4K 50 frames a second internally, which was a real game changer. But the reason I continue to use it is because of its low light capabilities. So as a technical diver, diving and filming at depth or inside caves, where light is at a premium, it's nice to know that I can push my ISO really high and still get a really nice image. In terms of housings, I use an Aquatica housing, and the reason I chose this housing is because the internal mechanism is really robust and simple. So if I was away somewhere in a remote location and something went wrong, I could field service this myself and get it up and running again, which brings a great peace of mind when you're out on an important shoot somewhere. Also, out of the box, you have the option to get it deep rated, which I think is 90 meters. But I've used this particular setup down to 120 meters off South Africa looking for coelacanths. Unfortunately, we didn't find any, but the housing worked flawlessly at depth. So all the buttons, all the dials, no resistance, no issues whatsoever. So that's really great. I also use acrylic domes because I dive and film in places where it's probably going to get scratched. And it's nice to know that a scratch on an acrylic dome is not the end of the world. You can just polish it out and it's ready to go.
My name's Ollie Putnam and this is my underwater camera setup. So this is a Gates housing for the Sony Ax 100 XD cam, which is this camera here. This camera can record up to 4K in a multitude of frame rates. It's got full manual control for all settings and built-in ND filters. So moving back to the housing, full manual controls, there's no electronics inside it. Apart from a moisture alarm. We've got the main port. This is a Gates GP34A wide angle port. And next to that, got a red flip filter which flips across in front of the camera lens. Here, this is a custom white balance slate on a flex arm, which you can pop in front of the lens and use as a reference for white balancing the camera. Using its one push white balance setting. A couple of floats just to keep it neutrally buoyant, and then underneath got a custom tripod which I've actually made myself, which allows you to rest it on the bottom, especially helpful if you're filming very small macro subjects. A couple of reasons why I chose this camera and housing when I bought it a couple of years ago. First of all is the size. It's not the smallest of housings, but it's also definitely not the biggest. That means that for traveling, it's just about manageable to lug around. I like the fact that it's a video dedicated camera and housing, so everything's set out for recording video, which is what I do the most. Another reason I really like this setup is that you've got, with one port and the fixed lens, you're able to, on one dive, go from wide angle all the way down to macro filming. You can zoom through in this port, which means that you're never going to miss something when you're filming. I also like the fact that you've got all of the controls right at your fingertips. As I said, everything dedicated to video, but they're also very big, chunky controls, which means if you're filming in cold water with big thick gloves on, you never struggle to press any of the buttons, even the smaller ones on the back. You can manage to push them with big thick gloves on.
So here are my weapons of choice. I've got the GoPro Black Hero 7 and I've got my original iPhone 6S with a ProShot underwater case. It is more of a budget option. Obviously, it does give you, back in the day when GoPros first came out, the colour correction wasn't great and it had a very domed feel to it, to the image. So this actually worked a lot better, especially when you put it on a homemade gimbal, homemade rig. Actually, ironically, still one of the best ones I've ever used. The reason being, it's super lightweight, and a lot of the ones you buy at the moment have fixed handles. So when you're panning, you're relying on your shoulders being extremely smooth. Whereas this has loose handles, and when you pan, the handles turn in the water as well. So it gives you a really nice, smooth, crisp shot. But yeah, that's my underwater, and obviously phones are improving all the time, so it is a cheaper option. But the slow-mo capability and the color grading on the iPhone, this was for the iPhone 6s, was absolutely phenomenal. It was better than the GoPros at the time. For anybody looking for a slightly different setup, slightly more budget option, this is a really good alternative to GoPro. Is just get your smartphone, put it in an underwater case, which half the price, 1/10 of the price, and you're away.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm a wildlife filmmaker specializing in underwater. My camera is a Sony A7S Mark II, and the reason I love it is because it's got a small body, so it's a mirrorless camera, but it's got a large sensor. It's got a full frame 35mm sensor. It's really good in low light, which makes it ideal for underwater filmmaking. And another reason I love it is because it records 4K footage internally in 25 frames a second. At the moment, I mostly use the standard kit lens from the camera. It's a 28-70 3.5 lens. It allows me to film close-ups, but also wide shots underwater. The housing that I'm using is an Icolite 200DL with an 8-inch dome port and a port extender. One of the extra pieces of equipment that I really love is the Paralens camera. It's a really small, versatile camera that I literally clip on my mask before going diving. The reason I love it is because you can use it as a second camera or behind the scenes, and it starts recording as you leave the surface, and it's got a huge battery life, and it also films 4K. I use it to film in 2.7K at 60 frames per second.
My name is Matthias and I'm an underwater cinematographer and filmmaker based in Zurich, Switzerland. The equipment I have been using for, let's say, the past 2 years to capture my underwater adventures is my trusted Panasonic GH5S, which is here in a Nauticam housing. I also use a Atomos Ninja 5 monitor to help me see better, which is as well in a Nauticam housing. I wanted something that is smallish and compact so I can take it on my travels, because let's be honest, most of my assignments, they do actually take place somewhere overseas. Also, I wanted a camera that gives me exceptional video quality. Next, let's talk about the housing for the GH5, which in my case is a housing by Nauticam. And the reason for me why I chose a Nauticam housing is simply because the housings are very reliable, they're built in a very sturdy way, and I can actually access every single function of the camera through the housing, and I find that incredibly important.
Hi guys, my name's Lloyd Jones and I'm an underwater videographer for Kraken Productions here in Wales. Now, we've been asked by Sharkman Dan to give you a brief rundown of our filming setup. We currently use the Sony AX700 video camera in the Gates AX700/Z90 underwater housing. Now, this current model came highly recommended to us by Ollie Putnam of Ollie Putnam Cinematography. On the underside of the housing we have a flex arm tripod, which provides you with a fantastic stable platform for any macro work that you need to do. We have a mixture of Hero 8 cameras as well as Hero 6 cameras, which we use for location scouting and behind the scenes work.
Hello, my name's Harry Stone. I'm a marine photographer and videographer, probably best known for my still images of sharks.
So regarding the camera gear that I use, some of you might be quite disappointed to see that it's a few years old now. The truth is that nothing's really come along yet that I thought was indispensable and worth the upgrade from this system that I know very well and I'm able to get saleable pictures with. Moving on to the cameras I use, this is my topside camera. It's a Canon 1DX. At the time I got it, it really was the pinnacle, and it's still an amazing camera now, even though it's been replaced.
The great thing with these pro level Canon bodies is they're weather sealed, they're very robust, which is brilliant for this sort of environments that I might be working on a boat and near sea spray. It's also very quick, which is fantastic for wildlife. And then moving on to this bad boy, this is the 5D Mark III. And this is, as well as being a camera I use a lot on land, it's also my main underwater camera. The majority of my images that you see have been taken with this one in the last few years. What's so great about this camera is the controls. All Canon Pro bodies have these similar controls. The wheel, the thumb wheel there, and this wheel here. They all work the same way, and I've been using Canon pro bodies for a long time, and so I can use them in my sleep really. I let my muscle memory take care of everything, and don't really have to think about it, which is absolutely fantastic.
This is the 5D Mark III after magically appearing in its housing. It's a Nauticam housing.
I looked at several housings before I chose the Nauticam, but at the time integrated vacuum systems weren't quite so commonplace, and this system had it all built in. That's what the screen light is here, and this bulkhead. What you do is you pump it here, you create a vacuum inside, and then the green light comes on to tell you that you've got a seal. And then in theory, as long as the green light's on, you're not going to get a flooded housing, and the peace of mind that gives you is quite incredible. It was a real game changer for me. I also find this magnifying viewfinder is a godsend. I think if you're used to using a DSLR camera, you can use it in the same way underwater as you do topside, because I can still see all of the readouts in the viewfinder. I can frame my shots perfectly with this, and it really is worth its weight in gold. Another good feature of Nauticam housings is that they move all the controls off to the sides, so you can still operate them while you're holding the handles. Other than that, all of the controls are available. There's a button for every button of the camera, and it works very, very well. Everything's very positive with this. I like it a lot. Any other criticism would be that the ISO switch can be a little fiddly, but I'm very used to it now, so that's okay.
Hi, I'm Tanner Mansell.
And I'm Janelle Van Rooten. Aquatica is known for their precision crafted aluminum housings. These housings have been through everything, boat accidents, they're used to block sharks, and they come out with minimal damage.
I ended up going with the Sony A7R3. You know, hauling this around in the water it's not extremely difficult, but doing it every single day was a little bit tiring, and it has it is a little harder to maneuver in the water with it.
So I went with the A7 III instead of the A7R III. After a lot of research and talking to the people at the photography store, I decided that this was a more affordable option for me, and also because it has a little bit better videography. The autofocus is a little bit better, which is something I really wanted, because after using the Canon mirrorless, which was the older version of the mirrorless, not their newer ones, it was really hard to get a photo that you want, and something that's really important to us in our job is being able to get that moment right away, because sharks are unpredictable. You never know when they're going to do something cool, such as yawn, getting bite shots. You want a camera that's able to focus on the dime. With this smaller lens, I was able to get the smaller dome, which is the 4-inch dome from the Aquatica. So this here is a hard case, which is super cool, because if you do drop your camera, which you never want to do, but if you were, this is very protective of the dome.
It's got everything that you need for a professional photography setup, and we are extremely happy with the way all this is performed. Huge shout out to Aquatica for just having such amazing and durable housings. You know, I can fully trust that these housings are going to keep our gear safe in the water. It's got, one of my favorite things is, you know, it's got a sensor. So it's got a vacuum pump here, and inside the housing you've got sensor capability, so when it is leaking air or water for that matter, it's going to beep, it's going to let us know, which is awesome. Small, compact, mirrorless cameras, powerful photo capabilities, powerful video capabilities, durable, very reliable housings, and we are definitely in love with our setups. This is everything that we had always worked for and wanted. So no complaints here.